Chapter 27 of the Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 27, wherein we shall see revealed a dark and secret mystery, and learn how it comes about that empires are often hurled against empires, and ruin falls alike upon the victors and the vanquished. And the wise reader, if such there be, which I doubt, will meditate upon this important utterance: a war is a matter of business. The angels had dispersed. At the foot of the slopes at Meudon, seated on the grass, Arcade and Zita watched the Seine flowing by the willows. "In this world," said Arcade, "in this world, which we call a cosmos, though it is but a microcosm, no thinking being can imagine that he is able to destroy even one atom. At the utmost, all we can hope for is that we shall succeed in modifying, here and there, the rhythm of some group of atoms, and the arrangement of certain cells. That, when one thinks of it, must be the limit of our great enterprise. And when we shall have set up the contradictor in the place of Yaldabaoth, we shall have done no more. Zita, is the evil in the nature of things, or in their arrangement? That is what we ought to know. Zita, I am profoundly troubled." "Arcade," replied Zita, "if to act we had to know the secret of nature, one would never act at all, and neither would one live, since to live is to act. Arcade, is your resolution failing you already?" Arcade assured the beautiful angel that he was resolved to plunge the demiurge into eternal darkness. A motor car passed by on the road, followed by a long trail of dust. It stopped before the two angels, and the hooked nose of Baron Everdingen appeared at the window. "Good morning, my celestial friends, good morning," said the capitalist. "Sons of heaven, I am pleased to meet you. I have a word of importance to say to you. Do not remain idle, do not go to sleep. Arm! Arm! You may be surprised by Yaldabaoth. You have a big war fund. Employ it without stint. I have just learned that the Archangel Michael has given large orders in heaven for thunderbolts and arrows. If you take my advice you will procure 50,000 more electrophores. I will take the order. Good day, angels. Long live the celestial country." And Baron Everdingen flew by the flowery shores of Louveciennes in the company of a pretty actress. "Is it true that they are taking up arms at the demiurge's?" asked Arcade. "It may be," replied Zita, "that up there another Baron Everdingen is inciting to arms." The guardian angel of young Maurice remained pensive for some moments. Then he murmured, "Can it be that we are the sport of financiers?" "Pooh!" said the beautiful archangel. "War is a business. It has always been a business." Then they discussed at length the means of executing their immense enterprise. Rejecting disdainfully the anarchistic proceedings of Prince Istar, they conceived a formidable and sudden invasion of the kingdom of heaven by their enthusiastic and well-drilled troops. Now Baratin, the innkeeper of La Jonchère, who had let the entertainment hall to the rebellious angels, was in the employ of the secret police. In the reports he furnished to the prefecture, he denounced the members of this secret meeting as meditating an attack on a certain person whom they described as obtuse and cruel, and whom they called à la Belote. The agent believed this to be a pseudonym denoting either the President of the Republic or the Republic itself. The conspirators had unanimously given voice to threats against à la Belote, and one of them, a very dangerous individual, well known in anarchist circles, who had already several convictions against him on account of writings and speeches of a seditious nature, and who was known as Prince Istar, or the Cherub, had brandished a bomb of very small calibre which seemed to contain a formidable machine. The other conspirators were unknown to Baratin, notwithstanding the fact that he frequented revolutionary circles. Many among them were very young men, mere beardless youths. There were two who, it appeared, had spoken with conspicuous vehemence: a certain Arcade, dwelling in the Rue Saint Jacques, and a woman of easy virtue called Zita, living at Montmartre, both without visible means of subsistence. The affair seemed sufficiently serious to the Prefect of Police to make him think it necessary to confer without delay with the President of the Council. The Third Republic was then going through one of those climacteric periods during which the French nation, enamoured of authority and worshipping force, gave itself up for lost because it was not governed enough, and clamoured loudly for a saviour. The President of the Council and Minister of Justice was only too eager to be that longed-for saviour. Still, for him to play that part, it was first necessary that there should be a danger to face. Thus the news of a plot was highly welcome to him. He questioned the Prefect of Police on the character and importance of the affair. The Prefect of Police explained that the people seemed to have money, intelligence, and energy, but that they talked too much and were too numerous to undertake secret and concerted action. The minister, leaning back in his armchair, pondered on the matter. The Empire writing table at which he was seated, the ancient tapestry which covered the walls, the clock and the candelabra of the Restoration period, all, in this traditional setting, reminded him of those great principles of government which remain immutable throughout the succession of regime, of stratagem and of bluff. After brief reflection, he concluded that the plot must be allowed to grow and take shape, that it would even be fitting to nurse it, to embroider it, to colour it, and only to stifle it after having extracted every possible advantage from it. He instructed the Prefect of Police to watch the affair closely, to render him an account of what went on from day to day, and to confide himself to the rôle of informer. "I rely on your well-known prudence. Observe and do not intervene." The minister lit a cigarette. He quite reckoned, with the help of this plot, on silencing the opposition, strengthening his own influence, diminishing that of his colleagues, humiliating the President of the Republic, and becoming the saviour of his country. The Prefect of Police undertook to follow the ministerial instructions, vowing inwardly all the while to act in his own way. He had a watch put upon the individuals pointed out by Baratin, and commanded his agents not to intervene, come what might. Perceiving that he was a marked man, Prince Istar, who united prudence with strength, withdrew the bombs from the gutter outside his window, where he had hidden them, and changing from motor bus to tube, from tube to motor bus, and choosing the most cunningly circuitous route, at length deposited his machines with the angelic musician. Every time he left his house in the Rue Saint Jacques, Arcade found a man of exaggerated smartness at his door, with yellow gloves, and in his tie a diamond bigger than the Regent. Being a stranger to the things of this world, the rebellious angel paid no attention to the circumstance; but young Maurice d'Esparvieu, who had undertaken the task of guarding his guardian angel, viewed this gentleman with uneasiness, for he equalled in assiduity and surpassed in vigilance that Monsieur Mignon, who had formerly allowed his inquisitive gaze to wander from the ram's heads on the Hôtel de la Sordière in the Rue Garancière to the apse of the church of St. Sulpice. Maurice came 2 and 3 times a day to see Arcady in his furnished rooms, warning him of the danger, and urging him to change his abode. Every evening he took his angel to night restaurants, where they supped with ladies of easy virtue. There young d'Esparvieu would foretell the issue of some coming glove fight, and afterwards exert himself to demonstrate to Arcady the existence of God, the necessity for religion, and the beauties of Christianity, and adjure him to renounce his impious and criminal undertakings, wherefrom, he said, he would reap but bitterness and disappointment. "For really," said the young apologist, "if Christianity were false, it would be known." The ladies approved of Maurice's religious sentiments, and when the handsome Arcady uttered some blasphemy in language they could understand, they put their hands to their ears and bade him be silent, for fear of being struck down with him. For they believed that God, in his omnipotence and sovereign goodness, taking sudden vengeance against those who insulted him, was quite capable of striking down the innocent with the guilty without meaning it. Sometimes the angel and his guardian took supper with the angelic musician. Maurice, who remembered from time to time that he was Bouchotte's lover, was displeased to see Arcady taking liberties with the singer. She had allowed him to do so ever since the day when, the angelic musician having had the little flowery couch repaired, Arcady and Bouchotte had made it a foundation for their friendship. Maurice, who loved Madame des Aubels a great deal, also loved Bouchotte a little, and was rather jealous of Arcady. Now jealousy is a feeling natural to man and beast, and causes them, however slight the attack, keen unhappiness. Therefore, suspecting the truth, which Bouchotte's temperament and the angel's character made sufficiently obvious, he overwhelmed Arcady with sarcasm and abuse, reproaching him with the immorality of his ways. Arcady answered, tranquilly, that it was difficult to subject physiological impulses to perfectly defined rules, and that moralists encountered great difficulties in the case of certain natural necessities. "Moreover," added Arcady, "I freely acknowledge that it is almost impossible systematically to constitute a natural moral law. Nature has no principles. She furnishes us with no reason to believe that human life is to be respected. Nature, in her indifference, makes no distinction between good and evil." "You see, then," replied Maurice, "that religion is necessary." "Moral law," replied the angel, "which is supposed to be revealed to us, is drawn in reality from the grossest empiricism. Custom alone regulates morals. What Heaven prescribes is merely the consecration of ancient customs. The divine law, promulgated amid fireworks on some Mount Sinai, is never anything but the codification of human prejudice. And from this fact, namely that morals change, religions which endure for a long time, such as Judeo-Christianity, vary their moral law." "At any rate," said Maurice, whose intelligence was swelling visibly, "you will grant me that religion prevents much profligacy and crime?" "Except when it promotes crime, as, for instance, the murder of Iphigenia." "Arcady," exclaimed Maurice, "when I hear you argue, I rejoice that I am not an intellectual." Meanwhile Théophile, with his head bent over the piano, his face hidden by the long fair veil of his hair, bringing down from on high his inspired hands onto the keys, was playing and singing the full score of Aline, Queen of Golconda. Prince Istar used to come to their friendly reunions, his pockets filled with bombs and bottles of champagne, both of which he owed to the liberality of Baron Everdingen. Bouchotte received the cherub with pleasure, since he saw in him the witness and the trophy of the victory she had gained on the little flowered couch. He was to her as the severed head of Goliath in the hands of the youthful David. And she admired the prince for his cleverness as an accompanist, his vigour, which she had subdued, and his prodigious capacity for drink. One night, when young d'Esparvieu took his angel home in his car from Bouchotte's house to the lodgings in the Rue Saint Jacques, it was very dark. Before the door the diamond in the spy's necktie glittered like a beacon. 3 cyclists, standing in a group under its rays, made off in diverse directions at the car's approach. The angel took no notice, but Maurice concluded that Arcade's movements interested various important people in the state. He judged the danger to be pressing, and at once made up his mind. The next morning he came to seek the suspect, to take him to the Rue de Rome. The angel was in bed. Maurice urged him to dress and to follow him. "Come," said he, "this house is no longer safe for you. You are watched. One of these days you will be arrested. Do you wish to sleep in jail? No? Well, then, come. I will put you in a safe place." The spirit smiled with some little compassion on his naïve preserver. "Do you not know," he said, "that an angel broke open the doors of the prison where Peter was confined, and delivered the apostle? Do you believe me, Maurice, to be inferior in power to that heavenly brother of mine? And do you suppose that I am unable to do for myself what he did for the fishermen of the Lake of Tiberias?" "Do not count on it, Arcade. He did it miraculously. Or by a stroke of luck, as a modern historian of the Church has it. But no matter. I will follow you. Just allow me to burn a few letters, and to make a parcel of some books I shall need." He threw some papers in the fireplace, put several volumes in his pockets, and followed his guide to the car, which was waiting for them not far off, outside the College of France. Maurice took the wheel. Imitating the cherub's prudence, he made so many windings and turnings, and so many rapid twists, that he put all the swift and numerous cyclists, speeding in pursuit, off the scent. At length, having left wheel marks in every direction all over the town, he stopped in the Rue de Rome, before the first door flat, where the angel had first appeared. On entering the dwelling which he had left 18 months before to carry out his mission, Arcade remembered the irreparable past, and breathing in the scent used by Gilberte, his nostrils throbbed. He asked after Madame des Aubels. "She is very well," replied Maurice. "A little plumper, and very much more beautiful for it. She still bears you a grudge for your forward behaviour. I hope that she will one day forgive you, as I have forgiven you, and that she will forget your offence. But she is still very annoyed with you." Young d'Esparvieu did the honours of his flat to his angel with the manners of a well-bred man and the tender solicitude of a friend. He showed him the folding bed which was opened every evening in the entrance hall and pushed into a dark cupboard in the morning. He showed him the dressing table, with its accessories, the bath, the linen cupboard, the chest of drawers, gave him the necessary information regarding the heating and lighting, told him that his meals would be brought and the rooms cleaned by the concierge, and showed him which bell to press when he required that person's services. He told him also that he must consider himself at home, and receive whom he wished. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of the Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France, translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 28, which treats of a painful domestic scene. So long as Maurice confined his selection of mistresses to respectable women, his conduct had called forth no reproach. It was a different matter when he took up with Bouchotte. His mother, who had closed her eyes to liaisons which, though guilty, were elegant and discreet, was scandalized when it came to her ears that her son was openly parading about with a music-hall singer. By dint of much prying and probing, Berthe, Maurice's younger sister, had got to know of her brother's adventures, and she narrated them, without any indignation, to her young girl friends. His little brother Léon declared to his mother one day, in the presence of several ladies, that when he was big he too would go on the spree, like Maurice. This was a sore wound to the maternal heart of Madame d'Esparvieu. About the same time there occurred a family event of a very grave nature which occasioned much alarm to Monsieur René d'Esparvieu. Drafts were presented to him, signed in his name by his son. His writing had not been forged, but there was no doubt that it had been the son's intention to pass off the signature as his father's. It showed a perverted moral sense, whence it appeared that Maurice was living a life of profligacy, that he was running into debt and on the point of outraging the decencies. The paterfamilias talked the matter over with his wife. It was arranged that he should give his son a very severe lecture, hint at vigorous corrective measures, and that in due course the mother should appear with gentle and sorrowing mien and endeavour to soothe the righteous indignation of the father. This plan being agreed upon, Monsieur René d'Esparvieu sent for his son to come to him in his study. To add to the solemnity of the occasion, he had arrayed himself in his frock-coat. As soon as Maurice saw it, he knew there was something serious in the wind. The head of the family was pale, and his voice shook a little, for he was a nervous man, as he declared that he would no longer put up with his son's irregular behaviour, and insisted on an immediate and absolute reform. No more wild courses, no more running into debt, no more undesirable companions, but work, steadiness, and reputable connections. Maurice was quite willing to give a respectful reply to his father, whose complaints, after all, were perfectly justified. But, unfortunately, Maurice, like his father, was shy, and the frock-coat which Monsieur d'Esparvieu had donned in order to discharge his magisterial duty with greater dignity seemed to preclude the possibility of any open and unconstrained intercourse. Maurice maintained an awkward silence, which looked very much like insolence, and this silence compelled Monsieur d'Esparvieu to reiterate his complaints, this time with additional severity. He opened one of the drawers in his historic bureau, the bureau on which Alexandre d'Esparvieu had written his essay on the civil and religious institutions of the world, and produced the bills which Maurice had signed. "Do you know, my boy," said he, "that this is nothing more nor less than forgery? To make up for such grave misconduct as that—" At this moment Madame d'Esparvieu, as arranged, entered the room attired in her walking dress. She was supposed to play the angel of forgiveness, but neither her appearance nor her disposition was suitable to the part. She was harsh and unsympathetic. Maurice harboured within him the seeds of all the ordinary and necessary virtues. He loved his mother and respected her. His love, however, was more a matter of duty than of inclination, and his respect arose from habit rather than from feeling. Madame René d'Esparvieu's complexion was blotchy, and having powdered herself in order to appear to advantage at the domestic tribunal, the colour of her face suggested raspberries sprinkled over with sugar. Maurice, being possessed of some taste, could not help realizing that she was ugly, and rather repulsively so. He was out of tune with her, and when she began to go through all the accusations his father had brought against him, making them out to be blacker than ever, the prodigal turned away his head to conceal his irritation. "Your aunt de Saint Fain," she went on, "met you in the street in such disgraceful company that she was really thankful that you forbore to greet her." "Aunt de Saint Fain!" Maurice broke out. "I like to hear her talking about scandals. Everyone knows the sort of life she has led, and now the old hypocrite wants to—" He stopped. He had caught sight of his father, whose face was even more eloquent of sorrow than of anger. Maurice began to feel as though he had committed murder, and could not imagine how he had allowed such words to escape him. He was on the point of bursting into tears, falling on his knees, and imploring his father to forgive him, when his mother, looking up at the ceiling, said with a sigh: "What offence have I committed against God to have brought such a wicked son into the world?" This speech struck Maurice as a piece of ridiculous affectation, and it pulled him up with a jerk. The bitterness of contrition suddenly gave place to the delicious arrogance of wrong-doing. He plunged wildly into a torrent of insolence and revolt, and breathlessly delivered himself of utterances quite unfit for a mother's ear. "If you will have it, mamma, rather than forbid me to continue my friendship with a talented lyrical artist, you would be better employed in preventing my elder sister, Madame de Margy, from appearing, night after night, in society and at the theatres, with a contemptible and disgusting individual that everybody knows is her lover. You should also keep an eye on my little sister, Jeanne, who writes objectionable letters to herself in a disguised hand, and then, pretending she has found them in her prayer book, shows them to you with assumed innocence, to worry and alarm you. It would be just as well, too, if you prevented my little brother Léon, a child of 7, from being quite so much with Mademoiselle Caporal, and you might tell your maid—" "Get out, sir! I will not have you in the house!" cried Monsieur René d'Esparvieu, white with anger, pointing a trembling finger at the door. Chapter 28. Chapter 29 of the Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels, by Anatole France, translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 29, wherein we see how the angel, having become a man, behaves like a man, coveting another's wife, and betraying his friend. In this chapter the correctness of young d'Esparvieu's conduct will be made manifest. The angel was pleased with his lodging. He worked of a morning, went out in the afternoon, heedless of detectives, and came home to sleep. As in days gone by, Maurice received Madame des Aubels twice or thrice a week in the room in which they had seen the apparition. All went very well until one morning Gilberte, having the night before left her little velvet bag on the table in the blue room, came to find it, and discovered Arcade stretched on the couch in his pyjamas, smoking a cigarette, and dreaming of the conquest of heaven. She gave a loud scream. You, monsieur! Had I thought to find you here, you may be quite sure I should not. I came to fetch my little bag, which is in the next room. Allow me," and she slipped past the angel, cautiously and quickly, as if he were a brazier. Madame des Aubels that morning, in her pale green tailor-made costume, was deliciously attractive. Her tight skirt displayed her movements, and her every step was one of those miracles of nature which fills men's hearts with amazement. She reappeared, bag in hand. "Once more, I ask your pardon. I never dreamt that—" Arcade begged her to sit down and to stay a moment. "I never expected, monsieur," said she, "that you would be doing the honours of this flat. I knew how dearly Monsieur d'Esparvieu loved you; nevertheless, I had no idea that—" The sky had suddenly grown overcast. A brownish glare began to steal into the room. Madame des Aubels told him she had walked for her health's sake, but a storm was brewing, and she asked if a carriage could be called for her. Arcade flung himself at Gilberte's feet, took her in his arms as one takes a precious piece of china, and murmured words which, being meaningless in themselves, expressed desire. She put her hands over his eyes and on his lips, and exclaimed, "I hate you!" And shaking with sobs, she asked for a drink of water. She was choking. The angel went to her assistance. In this moment of extreme peril she defended herself courageously. She kept saying, "No, no, I will not love you. I should love you too well." Nevertheless, she succumbed. In the sweet familiarity which followed their mutual astonishment, she said to him, "I have often asked after you. I knew that you were an assiduous frequenter of the playhouses at Montmartre, that you were often seen with Mademoiselle Bouchotte, who, nevertheless, is not at all pretty. I knew that you had become very smart, and that you were making a good deal of money. I was not surprised. You were born to succeed. The day of your—" and she pointed at the spot between the window and the wardrobe with the mirror, "apparition, I was vexed with Maurice for having given you a suicide's rags to wear. You pleased me. Oh, it was not your good looks. Don't think that women are as sensitive as people say to outward attractions. We consider other things in love. There is a sort of—well, anyhow, I loved you as soon as I saw you." The shadows grew deeper. She asked, "You are not an angel, are you? Maurice believes you are, but he believes so many things, Maurice." She questioned Arcade with her eyes, and smiled maliciously. "Confess that you have been fooling him, and that you are no angel." Arcade replied, "I only aspire to please you. I will always be what you want me to be." Gilberte decided that he was no angel. First, because no one is ever an angel. Secondly, for more detailed reasons which drew her thoughts to the question of love. He did not argue the matter with her, and once again words were found inadequate to express their feelings. Outside the rain was falling thick and fast, the windows were streaming, lightning lit up the muslin curtains, and thunder shook the panes. Gilberte made the sign of the cross, and remained with her head hidden in her lover's bosom. At this moment Maurice entered the room. He came in wet and smiling, confident, tranquil, happy, to announce to Arcade the good news that, with his half share in the previous day's race at Longchamp, the angel had won 12 times his stake. Surprising the lady and the angel in their embrace, he became furious. Anger gripped the muscles of his throat. His face grew red with blood, and the veins stood out on his forehead. He sprang with clenched fists towards Gilberte, and then suddenly stopped. Interrupted motion was transformed into heat. Maurice fumed. His anger did not arm him, like Archilochus, with lyrical vengeance. He merely applied an offensive epithet to his unfaithful one. Meanwhile she had recovered her dignified bearing. She rose, full of modesty and grace, and gave her accuser a look which expressed both offended virtue and loving forgiveness. But as young d'Esparvieu continued to shower coarse and monotonous insults on her, she grew angry in her turn. "You are a pretty sort of person, are you not?" she said. "Did I run after this Arcade of yours? It was you who brought him here, and in what a state, too! You had only one idea, to give me up to your friend. Well, monsieur, you can do as you like. I am not going to oblige you." Maurice d'Esparvieu replied simply, "Get out of it, you trollop," and he made a motion as if to push her out. It pained Arcade to see his mistress treated so disrespectfully, but he thought he lacked the necessary authority to interfere with Maurice. Madame des Aubels, who had lost none of her dignity, fixed young d'Esparvieu with her imperious gaze, and said, "Go and get me a carriage." And so great is the power of woman over a well-bred soul in a gallant nation that the young Frenchman went immediately and told the concierge to call a taxi. Madame des Aubels, with a studied exhibition of charm in every movement, took leave of them, throwing Maurice the contemptuous look that a woman owes to him whom she has deceived. Maurice witnessed her departure with an outward expression of indifference he was far from feeling. Then he turned to the angel, clad in the flowered pyjamas, which Maurice himself had worn the day of the apparition, and this circumstance, trifling in itself, added fuel to the anger of the host who had been thus shamefully deceived. "Well," he said, "you may pride yourself on being a despicable individual. You have behaved basely, and all for nothing. If the woman took your fancy, you had but to tell me. I was tired of her. I had had enough of her. I would have willingly left her to you." He spoke thus to hide his pain, for he loved Gilberte more than ever, and the creature's treachery caused him great suffering. He pursued, "I was about to ask you to take her off my hands. But you have followed your lower nature. You have behaved like a sweep." If at this solemn moment Arcade had but spoken one word from his heart, Maurice would have burst into tears and forgiven his friend and his mistress, and all three would have become content and happy once again. But Arcade had not been nourished on the milk of human kindness. He had never suffered, and did not know how to sympathize with suffering. He replied with frigid wisdom, "My dear Maurice, that same necessity which orders and constrains the actions of living beings produces effects that are often unexpected, and sometimes absurd. Thus it is that I have been led to displease you. You would not reproach me if you had a good philosophical understanding of nature, for you would then know that free will is but an illusion, and that physiological affinities are as exactly determined as are chemical combinations, and, like them, may be summed up in a formula. I think that in your case it might be possible to inculcate these truths, but it would be a difficult task, and maybe they would not bring you the serenity which eludes you. It is fitting, therefore, that I should leave this spot, and—" "Stay!" said Maurice. Maurice had a very clear sense of social obligations. He put honour, when he thought about it, above everything. So now he told himself very forcibly that the outrage he had suffered could only be wiped out with blood. This traditional idea instantly lent an unexpected nobility to his speech and bearing. "It is I, monsieur," said he, "who will quit this place, never to return. You will remain here, since you are a refugee. My seconds will wait upon you." The angel smiled. "I will receive them, if it gives you pleasure, but bethink you, my dear Maurice, I am invulnerable. Celestial spirits, even when they are materialized, cannot be touched by point of sword or pistol shot. Consider, my dear Maurice, the awkward situation in which this fatal inequality puts me, and realize that in refusing to appoint seconds I cannot give as a reason my celestial nature. It would be unprecedented." "Monsieur," replied the heir of the Bussart d'Esparvieu, "you should have thought of that before you insulted me." Out he marched haughtily, but no sooner was he in the street than he staggered like a drunken man. The rain was still falling. He walked unseeing, unhearing, at haphazard, dragging his feet in the gutters, through pools of water, through heaps of mud. He followed the outer boulevards for a long time, and at length, foredone with weariness, lay down on the edge of a piece of waste land. He was muddied up to the eyes. Mud and tears smeared his face. The brim of his hat was dripping with rain. A passer-by, taking him for a beggar, tossed him a copper. He picked it up, put it carefully in his waistcoat pocket, and set off to find his seconds. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 30, which treats of an affair of honour, and which will afford the reader an opportunity of judging whether, as Arcady affirms, the experience of our faults makes better men and women of us. The ground chosen for the combat was Colonel Manchon's garden, on the Boulevard de la Reine at Versailles. Messieurs de la Verdelière and Le Truc de Ruffec, who had both of them constant practice in affairs of honour, and knew the rules with great exactness, assisted Maurice d'Esparvieu. No duel was ever fought in the Catholic world without Monsieur de la Verdelière being present, and in making application to this swordsman, Maurice had conformed to custom, though not without a certain reluctance, for he had been notorious as the lover of Madame de la Verdelière. But Monsieur de la Verdelière was not to be looked upon as a husband. He was an institution. As to Monsieur Le Truc de Ruffec, honour was his only known profession, and avowedly his sole resource, and when the matter was made the subject of ill-natured comment in society, the question was asked what finer career than that of honour Monsieur Le Truc de Ruffec could possibly have adopted. Arcady's seconds were Prince Istar and Théophile. The celestial musician had not voluntarily, nor with a good grace, taken a hand in this affair. He had a horror of every kind of violence, and disapproved of single combat. The report of pistols and the clash of swords were intolerable to him, and the sight of blood made him faint. This gentle son of heaven had obstinately refused to act as second to his brother, Arcady, and to bring him to the starting point, the cherub had had to threaten to break a bottle of panclastite over his head. Besides the combatants, the seconds, and the doctors, the only people in the garden were a few officers from the barracks at Versailles and several reporters. Although young d'Esparvieu was known merely as a young man of family, and Arcady had never been heard of at all. The duel had attracted quite a large crowd of inquisitive individuals, and the windows of the adjoining houses were crammed with photographers, reporters, and society people. What had aroused much curiosity was that a woman was known to be the cause of the quarrel. Many mentioned Bouchotte, but the majority said it was Madame des Aubels. It had been remarked upon, moreover, that duels in which Monsieur de la Verdelière acted as second drew all Paris. The sky was a soft blue, the garden all abloom with roses, a blackbird was piping in a tree. Monsieur de la Verdelière, who, stick in hand, conducted the affair, laid the points of the swords together, and said, "Allez, messieurs!" Maurice d'Esparvieu attacked by doubling and beating the blade. Arcady retired, keeping his sword in line. The first engagement was without result. The seconds were under the impression that Monsieur d'Esparvieu was in a grievous state of nervous irritability, and that his adversary would wear him down. In the second encounter, Maurice attacked wildly, spread out his arms, and exposed his breast. He attacked as he advanced, gave a straight thrust, and the point of his sword grazed Arcady on the shoulder. The latter was thought to be wounded, but the seconds ascertained with surprise that it was Maurice who had received a scratch on the wrist. Maurice asserted that he felt nothing, and Dr. Kiel declared, after examination, that his client might continue the fight. After the regulation quarter of an hour, the duel was resumed. Maurice attacked with fury. His adversary was obviously nursing him, and, what disturbed Monsieur de la Verdelière, seemed to be paying very little attention to his own defence. At the opening of the fifth bout, a black spaniel that had got into the garden no one knew how, rushed out from a clump of rose bushes, made its way on the space reserved for the combatants, and, in spite of sticks and cries, ran in between Maurice's legs. The latter seemed as though his arm were benumbed, merely gave a shoulder thrust at his invulnerable opponent. He then delivered a straight lunge and impaled his arm on his adversary's sword, which made a deep wound just below the elbow. Monsieur de la Verdelière stopped the fight, which had lasted an hour and a half. Maurice was conscious of a painful shock. They laid him down on a grassy bank against a wall covered with wisteria. While the surgeon was dressing the wound, Maurice called Arcady and offered him his wounded hand. And when the victor, saddened with his victory, advanced, Maurice embraced him tenderly, saying, "Be generous, Arcady. Forgive my treachery. Now that we have fought, I can ask you to be reconciled with me." He embraced his friend, weeping, and whispered in his ear, "Come and see me, and bring Gilberte." Maurice, who was still unreconciled with his parents, was taken to the little flat in the Rue de Rome. No sooner was he stretched out on the bed at the far end of the bedroom, where the curtains were drawn as on the day of the apparition, than he saw Arcady and Gilberte appear. He began to suffer greatly from his wound. His temperature was rising, but he was at peace, happy and contented. Angel and woman, both in tears, drew themselves at the foot of the bed. He took both their hands with his left, smiled on them, and kissed them tenderly. "I am sure now that I shall never quarrel with either of you again. You will deceive me no more. I now know you are capable of anything." Gilberte, weeping, swore that Maurice had been misled by appearances, that she had never betrayed him with Arcady, that she had never betrayed him at all. And in a great gush of sincerity she persuaded herself that this was so. "You wrong yourself, Gilberte. replied the wounded man. "It did happen. It had to. And it is well. Gilberte, you were basely false to me with my best friend in this very room, and you were right. If you had not been, we should not be here, reunited, all three of us, and I should not be at your side tasting the greatest happiness of my life. Oh, Gilberte, how wrong of you to deny a perfect and accomplished fact!" "If you wish, my friend," replied Gilberte a little acidly, "I will not deny it. But it will only be to please you." Maurice made her sit down on the bed, and begged Arcade to be seated in the armchair. "My friend," said Arcade, "I was innocent. I became man. Straightway I did evil, then I became better." "Do not let us exaggerate things," said Maurice. "Let's have a game of bridge." Scarcely, however, had the patient seen 3 aces in his hand and called "no trumps," than his eyes began to swim, the cards slipped from his fingers, head fell heavily back on the pillow, and he complained of a violent headache. Almost immediately, Madame des Aubels went off to pay some calls, for she made a point of appearing in society, in order that the calmness and confidence of her demeanour might give the lie to the various rumours that were current concerning her. Arcade saw her to the door, and, with a kiss, inhaled from her a delicate perfume which he brought back with him into the room where Maurice lay dozing. "I am perfectly content," murmured the latter, "that things should have happened as they have." "It was bound to be so," answered the spirit. "All the other angels in revolt would have done as I did with Gilberte. Women, saith the Apostle, should pray with their heads covered, because of the angels, and the Apostle speaks thus because he knows that the angels are disturbed when they look upon them and see that they are beautiful. No sooner do they touch the earth than they desire to embrace mortal women and fulfil their desire. Their clasp is full of strength and sweetness. They hold the secret of those ineffable caresses which plunge the daughters of men into unfathomable depths of delight, laying upon the lips of their happy victims a honey that burns like fire, making their veins flow with torrents of refreshing flames. They leave them raptured and undone." "Stop your clatter, you unclean beast!" cried the wounded one. "One word more," said the angel, "just one other word, my dear Maurice, to bear out what I say, and I will let you rest quietly. There's nothing like having sound references. In order to assure yourself that I am not deceiving you, Maurice, on this subject of the amorous embraces of angels and women, look up Justin, Apologies 1 and 2, Flavius Josephus, Jewish Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 3, Athenagoras, Concerning the Resurrection, Lactantius, Book 2, Chapter 15, Tertullian, on the Veil of the Virgins, Marcus of Ephesus in Cellus, Eusebius, Preparatio Evangelica, Book 5, Chapter 4, St. Ambrose, in his book on Noah and the Ark, Chapter 5, St. Augustine in his City of God, Book 15, Chapter 23, Father Maldonat, the Jesuit, Treatise on Demons, page 248, Pierre Lebier, the King's Counsellor. Arcade, please, for pity's sake, be quiet. Do, please do, and send this dog away," cried Maurice, whose face was burning, and whose eyes were starting from his head, for in his delirium he thought he saw a black spaniel on his bed. Madame de la Verdelière, who was assiduous in every modish and patriotic practice, was reckoned, in the best French society, as one of the most gracious of the great ladies interested in good works. She came herself to ask for news of Maurice, and offered to nurse the wounded man. But at the vehement instigation of Madame des Aubels, Arcade shut the door in her face. Expressions of sympathy were showered upon Maurice. Piled on the salver, visiting cards displayed their innumerable little dog's ears. Monsieur Le Truc de Ruffec was one of the first to show his manly sympathy at the flat in the Rue de Rome, and, holding out his loyal hand, asked young d'Esparvieu, as one honourable man to another, for 25 louis to pay a debt of honour. "Of course, my dear Maurice, that is the sort of thing one could not ask of everybody." The same day Monsieur Gaétan came to press his nephew's hand. The latter introduced Arcade. "This is my guardian angel, whose foot you thought so beautiful when you saw the print it had made on the tell-tale powder, uncle. He appeared to me last year in this very room. You don't believe it? Well, it is true, nevertheless." Then, turning towards the spirit, he said, "What say you, Arcade? The Abbé Patouille, who is a great theologian and a good priest, does not believe that you are an angel, and Uncle Gaétan, who doesn't know his catechism and hasn't a scrap of religion in him, doesn't think so either. They deny you, the pair of them, the one because he has faith, the other because he hasn't. After that you may be sure that your history, if ever it comes to be narrated, will scarcely appear credible. Moreover, the man that took it into his head to tell your story would not be a man of taste, and would not come in for much approval. For your story is not a pretty one. I love you, but I sit in judgment upon you too. Since you fell into atheism, you have become an abominable scoundrel, a bad angel, a bad friend, a traitor, and a homicide, for I suppose it was to bring about my death that you sent that black spaniel between my legs on the duelling ground." The angel shrugged his shoulders, and, addressing Gaétan, said, "Alas, monsieur, I am not surprised at finding little credit in your eyes. I have been told that you have fallen out with the Judeo-Christian heaven, which is where I came from." "Monsieur," answered Gaétan, "my faith in Jehovah is not sufficiently strong to enable me to believe in his angels." "Monsieur, he whom you call Jehovah is really a coarse and ignorant demiurge, and his name is Ialdabaoth." "In that case, monsieur, I am perfectly ready to believe in him." "He is a narrow-minded ignoramus, is he? Then belief in his existence offers me no further difficulty. How is he getting on?" "Badly. We are going to lay him low next month." "Don't make too sure of that, monsieur. You remind me of my brother-in-law, Cuissart, who has been expecting to hear of the fall of the Republic for the past 30 years. "You see, Arcade," exclaimed Maurice, "Uncle Gaétan thinks as I do. He knows you won't succeed." "And pray, Monsieur Gaétan, what makes you think I shall not succeed?" "Your Ialdabaoth is still very powerful in this world, if he isn't in the other. In days gone by he used to be upheld by his priests, by those who believed in him. Now he is supported by those who do not believe in him, by the philosophers. A pedant of a fellow called Picrochole has recently come on the scene, who wants to make a bankrupt of science in order to do a good turn to the Church. And just lately, pragmatism has been invented for the express purpose of gaining credit for religion in the minds of rationalists." "You have been studying pragmatism?" "Not I. I was frivolous once, and I went in for metaphysics. I read Hegel and Kant. I have become serious with years, and now I only trouble myself about things evident to the senses. what the eye can see or what the ear can hear. Man is summed up in art. All the rest is moonshine." Thus the conversation went on until evening. It was marked by obscenities that would have brought a blush, I will not say to a cuirassier, for cuirassiers are frequently chaste, but even to a Parisienne. Monsieur Sariette came to see his old pupil. When he entered the room, the bust of Alexandre d'Esparvieu seemed to take shape behind the librarian's bald head. He drew near the bed. In the place of blue curtains, mirrored wardrobe, and chimney-piece, there straightway came into view the heavy-laden bookcases of the room of the globes and busts, and the air was heavy with piles of papers, records, and files. Monsieur Sariette could not be disassociated from his library. One could not conceive of him or even see him apart from it. He himself was paler, more vague, more shadowy, and more a creature of the fancy than the fancies he evoked. Maurice, who had grown very quiet, was sensible of this mark of friendship. "Sit down, Monsieur Sariette. You know Madame des Aubels. May I introduce Arcade to you, my guardian angel? It was he who, while yet invisible, pillaged your library for 2 years, made you lose all desire for food and drink, and drove you to the verge of madness. He it was who moved piles of books from the room of the busts to my summer house one day. Under your very nose he took away I know not what precious volumes, and was the cause of your falling on the staircase. Another day he took a volume of Salomon-Reinach's, and, forced to go out with me, for he never left me, as I have learnt later, he let the volume drop in the gutter of the Rue Princesse. Forgive him, Monsieur Sariette. He had no pockets. He was invisible. I bitterly regret, Monsieur Sariette, that all your old books were not devoured by fire or swallowed up by a flood. They made my angel lose his head. He became man, and now knows neither faith nor obedience to laws. It is I now who am his guardian angel. God knows how it will all end." While listening to his speech, Monsieur Sariette's face took on an expression of infinite, irreparable, eternal sadness. The sadness of a mummy. Rising to take his leave, the sorrowful librarian murmured in Arcade's ear, "The poor child is very ill. He is delirious." Maurice called the old man back. "Do stay, Monsieur Sariette. You shall have a game of bridge with us." "Monsieur Sariette, listen to my advice. Do not do as I did. Do not keep bad company. You will be lost. I shudder at the mere thought. Monsieur Sariette, do not go yet. I have something very important to ask you. When you come again, bring me a book on the truth of religion, so that I may study it. I must restore to my guardian angel the faith which he has lost." End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of the Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 31, wherein we are led to marvel at the readiness with which an honest man of timid and gentle nature can commit a horrible crime. Profoundly distressed by the dark utterances of young Maurice, Monsieur Sariette took a motor omnibus and went to see Père Guinardon, his friend, his only friend, the one person in the whole world whom it gave him pleasure to see and hear. When Monsieur Sariette entered the shop in the Rue de Courcelles, Guinardon was alone, dozing in the depths of an antique armchair. His face, surrounded by his curly hair and luxuriant beard, was crimson in hue. Little violet filaments spread a network about the fleshy part of his nose, to which the wines of Burgundy had imparted a purple tint, for there was no longer any disguising the fact. Père Guinardon drank. 2 feet away from him, on the fair Octavie's work table, a rose, all but withered, drooped in an empty vase, and in a basket a piece of embroidery was lying unfinished and neglected. The young Octavie's absences from the shop were growing more and more frequent, and Monsieur Blancmesnil never called when she was not there. The reason of this was that they were meeting 3 times a week at 5 o'clock in a house close to the Champs Elysees. Père Guinardon knew nothing of that. He did not know the full extent of his misfortune, but he suffered. Monsieur Sariette shook his old friend by the hand. But he did not inquire for the young Octavie, for he refused to recognize the connection. He would sooner have talked about Zéphirine, who had been so cruelly deserted, and whom he hoped the old man would make his lawful wife. But Monsieur Sariette was prudent. He contented himself with asking Guinardon how he was. "Perfectly well," was Guinardon's reply. But he felt ill, for either age and love-making had undermined his sturdy constitution, or else young Octavie's faithlessness had dealt her lover a fatal blow. "God be praised," he went on, "I still retain my powers of mind and body. I am chaste. Be chaste, Sariette. Chastity is strength." That evening Père Guinardon had taken some specially valuable books out of the Kingwood cabinet to show to a distinguished bibliophile, Monsieur Victor Meyer, and after the latter's departure he had dropped off to sleep, without putting them back in their places. Books had an attraction for Monsieur Sariette, and seeing these particular volumes on the marble top of the cabinet, he began to examine them with interest. The first one he looked at was La Pucelle, in Morocco, with the English continuation. Doubtless it pained his patriotic and Christian heart to admire its text and illustrations, but a good copy was always virtuous and pure in his sight. Continuing to chat very affectionately with Guinardon, he picked up, one by one, the books which the antiquary had, for one reason or another, binding, illustrations, distinguished ownership, or scarcity, added to his stock. Suddenly a glorious shout of joy and love broke from his lips. He had discovered the Lucretius of the Prior de Vendôme, his Lucretius, and he was clasping it to his bosom. "Once again I behold you," he sighed, as he pressed it to his lips. At first Père Guinardon could not quite make out what his old friend was talking about, but when the latter declared to him that the volume was from the d'Esparvieu collection, that it belonged to him, Sariette, and that he was going to take it away without further ado, the antiquary completely woke up, got on his legs, declared emphatically that the book belonged to him, Guinardon, by right of true and lawful purchase, and that he would not part with it unless he got 5,000 francs for it, cash down. "You don't take in what I'm telling you," answered Sariette. "The book belongs to the d'Esparvieu library. I must restore it to its place." "Pas de ça, Lisette," hummed Guinardon. "The book belongs to me, I tell you." "You are crazy, my good Sariette." And noticing that, as a matter of fact, the librarian had a wandering look in his eye, he took the book from him and tried to change the conversation. "Have you seen, Sariette, that the rascals are going to rip up the Palais Mazarin and cover up the very heart and centre of the old town, the finest and most venerable place in the whole of Paris, with the deuce knows what works of art of theirs? They are worse than the Vandals, For the Vandals, although they destroyed the buildings of antiquity, did not replace them with hideous and disgusting erections and atrocious bridges like the Pont d'Alexandre. And your poor Rue Garancière, Sariette, has fallen a prey to the barbarians. What have they done with the pretty bronze mask of the palace fountain?" Monsieur Sariette never listened to a word of all this. "Guinardon, you have not understood me. Now listen. This belongs to the d'Esparvieu library. It was taken away, how or by whom I know not. Dreadful and mysterious things went on in that library. But anyhow, the book was stolen. I need scarcely appeal to your sentiments of scrupulous probity, my dear friend. You would not like to be regarded as the receiver of stolen goods. Give me the book. I will return it to Monsieur d'Esparvieu, who will duly requite you. Of that you may be sure. Rely on his generosity, and you will be acting like the downright good fellow that you are." The antiquary smiled a bitter smile. "Catch me relying on the generosity of that old curmudgeon of a d'Esparvieu. Why, he'd skin a flea to get its coat. Look at me, Sariette, old boy, and tell me if I look like a dunderhead. You know perfectly well that d'Esparvieu refused to give 50 francs on a second-hand shop for a portrait of Alexandre d'Esparvieu, the founder of the family, by Herzent, and that consequently the founder of the family has had to remain on the Boulevard Montparnasse, propped against a Jew-hawker's stall, just opposite the cemetery, where all the dogs of the neighbourhood come and make water on him. Catch me trusting to Monsieur d'Esparvieu's liberality. You've got some bright ideas in your head, you have. Very well, Guinardon. I myself will undertake to pay you any indemnity that a board of arbitrators may fix upon. Do you hear? Now don't go and do the handsome for people who won't give you so much as a thank you. This man, d'Esparvieu, has taken your knowledge, your energies, your whole life, for a salary that even a valet wouldn't accept. So leave that idea alone. In any case, it is too late. The book is sold." "Sold? To whom?" asked Sariette in agonized tones. "What does that matter? You'll never see it again. You'll hear no more about it. It's off to America." "To America? The Lucretius with the arms of Philippe de Vendôme and Marginalia in Voltaire's own hand? My Lucretius off to America?" Père Guinardon began to laugh. "My dear Sariette, you remind me of the Chevalier de Grieux when he learns that his darling mistress is to be transported to the Mississippi. 'My dear mistress going to the Mississippi?' says he. 'No, no,' answered Sariette, very pale. 'This book shall not go to America. It shall return, as if ought, to the d'Esparvieu library. Let me have it, Guinardon.' The antiquary made a second attempt to put an end to an interview that now looked as if it might take an ugly turn. 'My good Sariette, you haven't told me what you think of my Greco. You never so much as glanced at it. It's an admirable piece of work all the same.' And Guinardon, putting the picture in a good light, went on, 'Now just look at St. Francis here, the poor man of the Lord, the brother of Jesus. See how his fuliginous body rises heavenward, like the smoke from an agreeable sacrifice, like the sacrifice of Abel.' 'Give me the book, Guinardon,' said Sariette, without turning his head. 'Give me the book.' The blood suddenly flew to Père Guinardon's head. 'That's enough of it,' he shouted, as red as a turkey cock, the veins standing out on his forehead. And he dropped the Lucretius into his jacket pocket. Straightway old Sariette flew at the antiquary, assailed him with a sudden fury, and, frail and weakly as he was, butted him back into young Octavie's armchair. Guinardon, in furious amazement, belched forth the most horrible abuse on the old maniac, and gave him a punch that sent him staggering back 4 paces against the Coronation of the Virgin by Fra Angelico, which fell down with a crash. Sariette returned to the charge, and tried to drag the book out of the pocket in which it lay hid. This time Père Guinardon would really have floored him had he not been blinded by the blood that was rushing to his head, and hit sideways at the work-table of his absent mistress. Sariette fastened himself on to his bewildered adversary, held him down in the armchair, and with his little bony hands clutched him by the neck, which, red as it was already, became a deep crimson. Guinardon struggled to get free, but the little fingers, feeling the mass of soft warm flesh about them, embedded themselves in it with delicious ecstasy. Some unknown force made them hold fast to their prey. Guinardon's throat began to rattle, saliva was oozing from one corner of his mouth. His enormous frame quivered now and again beneath the grasp, but the tremors grew more and more intermittent and spasmodic. At last they ceased. The murderous hands did not let go their hold. Sariette had to make a violent effort to loose them. His temples were buzzing. Nevertheless, he could hear the rain falling outside, muffled steps going past on the pavement, newspapermen shouting in the distance. He could see umbrellas passing along in the dim light. He drew the book from the dead man's pocket and fled. The fair Octavie did not go back to the shop that night. She went to sleep in a little entresol underneath the bric-a-brac stores, which Monsieur de Blancmesnil had recently bought for her in this same Rue de Courcelles. The workman whose task it was to shut up the shop found the antiquary's body still warm. He called Madame Lenain, the concierge, who laid Guinardon on the couch, lit a couple of candles, put a sprig of box in a saucer of holy water, and closed the dead man's eyes. The doctor who was called in to certify the death ascribed it to apoplexy. Zéphirine, informed of what had happened by Madame Lenain, hastened to the house and sat up all night with the body. The dead man looked as if he were sleeping. In the flickering light of the candles, El Greco's saint mounted upwards like a wreath of smoke, the gold of the primitives gleamed in the shadows. Near the death-bed, a little woman by Baudouin was plainly discernible giving herself a douche. All through the night Zéphirine's lamentations could be heard 50 yards away. "He's dead! He's dead!" she kept saying. "My friend, my divinity, my all, my love!" But no, he is not dead. He moves. "It is I, Michel. I, your Zéphirine. Awake, hear me, answer me. I love you. If ever I caused you pain, forgive me. Dead, dead, oh my God! See how beautiful he is. He was so good, so clever, so kind. My God, my God, my God! If I had been there he would not now be lying dead. Michel, Michel!" When morning came she was silent. They thought she had fallen asleep. She was dead too. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of The Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 32, which describes how Nectaire's flute was heard in the tavern of Clodomir. Madame de la Verdelière, having failed to force an entrée, as sick nurse, returned after several days had elapsed. during the absence of Madame des Aubels, to ask Maurice d'Esparvieu for his subscription to the French churches. Arcade led her to the bedside of the convalescent. Maurice whispered in the angel's ear, "Traitor, deliver me from this ogress immediately, or you will be answerable for the evil which soon will befall." "Be calm," said Arcade, with a confident air. After the conventional complimentary flourishes, Madame de la Verdelière signed to Maurice to dismiss the angel. Maurice feigned not to understand, and Madame de la Verdelière disclosed the ostensible reason of her visit. "Our churches," she said, "our beloved country churches, what is to become of them?" Arcade gazed at her angelically and sighed. "They will disappear, madame. They will fall into ruin. And what a pity! I shall be inconsolable. The church amid the villagers' cottages is like the hen amidst her chickens." "Just so," exclaimed Madame de la Verdelière with a delighted smile. "It is just like that." "And the spires, madame?" "Oh, monsieur, the spires!" "Yes, the spires, madame, that stick up into the skies towards the little cherubim, like so many syringes." Madame de la Verdelière incontinently left the place. That same day, Monsieur l'Abbé Patouille came to offer the wounded man good counsel and consolation. He exhorted him to break with his bad companions, and to be reconciled to his family. He drew a picture of the sorrowful father, the mother in tears, ready to receive their long-lost child with open arms. Renouncing with manly effort a life of profligacy and deluding joys, Maurice would recover his peace and strength of mind. He would free himself from devouring chimeras, and shake off the evil spirit. Young d'Esparvieu thanked Abbé Patouille for all his kindness, and made a protestation of his religious feelings. "Never," said he, "have I had such faith, and never have I been in such need of it. Just imagine, Monsieur l'Abbé, I have to teach my guardian angel his catechism all over again, for he has quite forgotten it." Monsieur l'Abbé Patouille heaved a deep sigh, and exhorted his dear child to pray, there being no other resource but prayer for a soul assailed by the devil. "Monsieur l'Abbé," asked Maurice, "may I introduce my guardian angel to you? Do stay a moment. He has gone to get me some cigarettes." "Unhappy child!" And Abbé Patouille's fat cheeks drooped in token of affliction. But almost immediately they plumped up again, as a sign of light-heartedness. For in his heart there was a matter for rejoicing. Public opinion was improving. The Jacobins, the Freemasons, the Coalitionists were everywhere in disgrace. The smart set led the way. The Académie Française was of the right way of thinking. The number of Christian schools was increasing by leaps and bounds. The young men of the Quartier Latin were submitting to the Church, and the École Normale exhaled the perfume of the seminary. The cross was gaining the day, but money was wanted, more money, always money. After 6 weeks' rest, Maurice was allowed by his doctor to take a drive. He wore his arm in a sling. His mistress and his friend went with him. They drove to the Bois, and took a gentle pleasure in looking upon the grass and the trees. They smiled on everything, and everything smiled on them. As Arcade had said, their faults had made them better. By the unlooked-for ways of jealousy and anger, Maurice had attained to calm and kindliness. He still loved Gilberte, and he loved her with an indulgent love. The angel still desired her as much as ever, but having once possessed her, his desire had lost the sting of curiosity. Gilberte forbore trying to please, and thereby pleased the more. They drank milk at the cascade, and found it good. They were all three innocent. Arcade forgot the injustice of the old tyrant of the world, but he was soon to be reminded of it. On entering his friend's house, he found Zita awaiting him, looking like a statue in ivory and gold. "You excite my pity," she said to him. "The day is at hand the like of which has never dawned since the beginning of time, and perhaps will never dawn again before the sun enters with all its train into the constellation of Hercules. We are on the eve of surprising Yaldabaoth in his palace of porphyry, and you, who are burning to deliver the heavens, who were so eager to enter in triumph into your emancipated country, you suddenly forget your noble purpose and fall asleep in the arms of the daughters of men. What pleasure can you find in intercourse with these unclean little animals, composed, as they are, of elements so unstable that they may be said to be in a state of constant evanescence? Oh, Arcade, I was indeed right to distrust you. You are but an intellectual, you do but feel idle curiosity. You are incapable of action." "You misjudge me, Zita," replied the angel. "It is the nature of the sons of heaven to love the daughters of men. Corruptible though it be, the material part of women and of flowers charms the senses none the less. But not one of these little animals can make me forget my hatred and my love, and I am ready to rise up against Yaldabaoth." Zita expressed her satisfaction at seeing him in this resolute mood. She urged him to pursue the accomplishment of this vast undertaking with undiminished ardour. Nothing must be hurried or deferred. A great action, Arcade, is made up of a multitude of small ones. The most majestic whole is composed of 1,000 minute details. Let us neglect nothing. She had come to take him to a meeting where his presence was required. They were to take a census of the revolutionaries. She added but one word: "Nectaire will be there." When Maurice saw Zita, he deemed her lacking in attraction. She failed to please him because she was perfectly beautiful, and because true beauty always caused him painful surprise. Zita inspired him with antipathy when he learned that she was an angel in revolt, and that she had come to seek Arcade to take him away among the conspirators. The poor child tried to retain his companion by all means that his wit and the circumstances afforded him. If his guardian angel would only remain with him, he would take him to a magnificent boxing match, to a review where he would witness the apotheosis of Poincaré, or, lastly, to a certain house he knew of where he would behold women remarkable for their beauty, talents, vices, or deformities. But the angel would not allow himself to be tempted, and said he was going with Zita. "What for?" "To plot the conquest of the skies." "Still the same nonsense. The conquest of... But there, I proved to you that it was neither possible nor desirable. Good night, Maurice." "You are going? Well, I will accompany you." And Maurice, his arm in a sling, went with Arcade and Zita all the way to Clodomir's restaurant at Montmartre, where the tables were laid in an arbour in the garden. Prince Istar and Théophile were already there, with a little creature who looked like a child, and was, in fact, a Japanese angel. "We are only waiting for Nectaire," said Zita. And at that moment the old gardener noiselessly appeared. He took his seat, and his dog lay down at his feet. French cooking is the best in the world. It is a glory that will transcend all others when humanity has grown wise enough to put the spit above the sword. Clodomir served the angels and the mortal who was with them with a soup made of cabbages and bacon, a loin of pork and kidneys cooked in wine, thereby proving himself a real Montmartre cook, and showing that he had not been spoilt by the Americans, who corrupt the most excellent chefs of the city of restaurants. Clodomir brought forth some Bordeaux, which, though unrecorded among the renowned vintages of Medoc, gave evidence by its choice and delicate aroma of the high nobility of its origin. We must not omit to chronicle that, after this wine and many others had been drunk, the cellarman, in solemn state, produced a Burgundy choice and rare, full-bodied yet not heavy, generous yet delicate, rich with the true Burgundian mellowness, a noble and, withal, a somewhat heady wine, that brought delight alike to mind and sense. "Hail to thee, Dionysus, greatest of the gods!" cried old Nectaire, raising his glass on high. "I drink to thee who wilt restore the golden age, and give again to mortal men, who will become heroes as of old, the grapes which the Lesbians used to cull, long since, from the vines of Methymna, who wilt restore the vineyards of Thasos, the white clusters of Lake Mareotis, the storehouses of Falernus, the vines of Tmolus, and the wine of Phanae, of all wines the king. And the juice thereof shall be divine, and, as in old Silenus' day, men shall grow drunk with wisdom and with love." When the coffee was served, Prince Istar, Zita, Arcady, and the Japanese angel took it in turns to give an account of the forces assembled against Yaldabaoth. Angels, in exchanging eternal bliss for the sufferings of an earthly life, grow in intelligence, acquire the means of going astray, and the faculty of self-contradiction. Consequently, their meetings, like those of men, are tumultuous and confused. Did one of them deal in figures, the others immediately called them in question. They could not add one number to another without quarrelling, and arithmetic itself, subjected to passion, lost its certitude. The cherub, who had brought with him the pious Theophile, waxed indignant when he heard the musician praising the Lord, and rained down such blows on his head as would have felled an ox. But the head of a musician is harder than a bucranium, and the blows which Theophile received did not avail to modify that angel's notion of divine providence. Arcady, having at great length set up his scientific idealism in opposition to Zita's pragmatism, the beautiful archangel told him that he argued badly. "And you are surprised at that?" exclaimed young Maurice's guardian angel. "I argue, like you, in the language of human beings. And what is human language but the cry of the beasts of the forests or the mountains, complicated and corrupted by arrogant anthropoids? How, then, Zita, can one be expected to argue well with a collection of angry or plaintive sounds like that? Angels do not reason at all. Men, being superior to the angels, reason imperfectly. I will not mention the professors who think to define the absolute with the aid of cries that they have inherited from the pithecanthropoid monkeys, marsupials, and reptiles, their ancestors. It is a colossal joke. How it would amuse the demiurge if he had any brains! It was a beautiful starlight night. The gardener was silent. "Nectaire," said the beautiful archangel, "play to us on your flute, if you are not afraid that the earth and heaven will be stirred to their depths thereby." Nectaire took up his flute. Young Maurice lighted a cigarette. The flame burnt brightly for a moment, casting back the sky and its stars into the shadows, and then died out. And Nectaire sang of the flame on his divine flute. The silvery voice soared aloft and sang, That flame was a whole universe which fulfilled its destiny in less than a minute. Suns and planets were formed therein. Venus Urania apportioned the orbits of the wandering spheres in those infinite spaces. Beneath the breath of Eros, the first of the gods, plants, animals, and thoughts sprang into being. In the 20 seconds which hurried by betwixt the life and death of those worlds, civilizations were unfolded, and empires sank in long decline. Mothers shed tears, and songs of love, cries of hatred, and sighs of victims rose upward to the silent skies. In proportion to its minuteness, that universe lasted as long as this one, whereof we see a few atoms glittering above our heads, has lasted or will last. They are, no one less than the other, but a gleam in the infinite. As the clear pure notes welled up into the charmed air, the earth melted into a soft mist, the stars revolved rapidly in their orbits, the Great Bear fell asunder, its parts flew far and wide. Orion's belt was shattered. The pole star forsook its magnetic axis. Sirius, whose incandescent flame had lit up the far horizon, grew blue, then red, flickered, and suddenly died out. The shaken constellations formed new signs, which were extinguished in their turn. By its incantations, the magic flute had compressed into one brief moment the life and the movement of this universe, which seems unchanged and eternal both to men and angels. It ceased, and the heavens resumed their immemorial aspect. Nectaire had vanished. Clodomir asked his guests if they were pleased with the cabbage soup, which, in order that it might be strong, had been kept simmering for 24 hours on the fire, and he sang the praises of the Beaujolais which they had drunk. The night was mild. Arcady, accompanied by his guardian angel, Theophile, Prince Istar, and the Japanese angel, escorted Zita home. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of The Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 33. How a Dreadful Crime Plunges Paris into a State of Terror. The city was asleep. Their footsteps rang loudly on the deserted pavement. Having reached the corner of the Rue Fortière, halfway up Montmartre, the little company halted before the dwelling of the beautiful angel. Arcady was talking about the thrones and dominations with Zita, who, her finger on the bell, could not make up her mind to ring. Prince Istar was tracing the mechanism of a new sort of bomb on the pavement with the end of his stick, and bellowed so loudly that he woke the sleeping citizens and stirred into activity the amatory passions of the neighboring Pasiphaes. Theophile was singing the barcarolle from the second act of Aline, Queen of Golconda, at the top of his voice. Maurice, his arm in a sling, was fencing left-handed with the Japanese, striking parts from the pavement, and crying, "A hit! A hit!" in a piercing voice. Meanwhile, Inspector Groll at the corner of the next street was dreaming. He had the bearing of a Roman legionary, and displayed all the characteristics of that proudly servile race, who, ever since men first took to building cities, have been the mainstays of empires and the support of ruling houses. Inspector Groll was very strong, but very tired. He suffered from an arduous profession and from lack of food. He was a man devoted to duty, but still a man, and he was unable to resist the wiles, the charms, and the blandishments of the gay ladies whom he met in swarms in the shadows along the empty streets and round about pieces of waste ground. He loved them. He loved like a soldier under arms. It tired him, but courage conquered fatigue. Though he had not yet reached the middle of life's way, he longed for sweet repose and peaceful country pursuits. At the corner of the Rue Muller, on this mild night, he stood lost in thought. He was dreaming of the house where he was born, of the little olive wood, of his father's bit of ground, of his old mother, bent with long and heavy labour, whom he would never see again. Roused from his reverie by the nocturnal tumult, Inspector Groll turned the corner of the street, and looked rather unfavourably at the band of loiterers, wherein his social instinct suspected enemies of law and order. He was patient and resolute. After a lengthy silence, he said with awe-inspiring calm, "Move on there." But Maurice and the Japanese angel were fencing and heard nothing. The musician heard nothing but his own melodies. Prince Istar was absorbed in the explanation of explosive formula. Zita was discussing with Arcade the greatest enterprise that had ever been conceived since the solar system issued from its original nebula, and thus they all remained unconscious of their surroundings. "Move on, I tell you," repeated Inspector Groll. This time the angels heard the solemn word of warning, but either through indifference or contempt they neglected to obey, and continued their talk, their songs, and their cries. "So you want to be taken up, do you?" shouted Inspector Groll, clapping his great hand on Prince Istar's shoulder. The cherub was indignant at this vile contact, and with one blow from his formidable fist sent the inspector flying into the gutter. But Constable Fesandet was already running to his comrade's aid, and they both fell upon the prince, whom they belaboured with mechanic fury, and whom, notwithstanding his strength and weight, they would perchance have dragged all bleeding to the police station, had not the Japanese angel overset them, one after the other, without effort, and reduced them to writhing and shrieking in the mud, before Maurice, Arcade, and Zita had time to intervene. As to the angelic musician, he stood apart trembling, and invoked the heavens. At this moment 2 bakers, who were kneading their dough in a neighbouring cellar, ran out at the noise, in their white aprons, stripped to the waist. With an instinctive feeling for social solidarity, they took the side of the downfallen police. Théophile conceived a just fear at the sight of them, and fled away. They caught him, and were about to hand him over to the guardians of the peace, when Arcade and Zita tore him from their hands. The fight continued, unequal and terrible, between the 2 angels and the 2 bakers. Like an athlete at Lysippus in strength and beauty, Arcade smothered his heavy adversary in his arms. The beautiful archangel drove her dagger into the baker who had attacked her. A dark stream of blood flowed down over his hairy chest, and the 2 white-capped supporters of the law sank to the ground. Constable Fesandet had fainted face downward in the gutter. But Inspector Groll, who had got up, blew a blast on his whistle, loud enough to be heard at the neighbouring police station, and sprang upon young Maurice, who, having but one arm with which to defend himself, fired his revolver with his left hand at the inspector, who put his hand to his heart, staggered, and dropped down. He gave a long sigh, and the shadows of eternity darkened his eyes. Meanwhile windows opened one by one, and heads looked out on the street. A sound of heavy steps approached. 2 policemen on bicycles debouched upon the street. Thereupon Prince Istar flung a bomb which shook the ground, put out the gas, shattered some of the houses, and enveloped the flight of young Maurice and the angels in a dense smoke. Arcade and Maurice came to the conclusion that the safest thing to do after this adventure was to return to the little flat in the Rue de Rome. They would certainly not be sought for immediately, and probably not at all, the bomb thrown by the Carib having fortunately wiped out all witnesses of the affair. They fell asleep towards dawn, and they had not yet awoke at 10 o'clock in the morning, when the concierge brought their tea. While eating his toast and butter and slice of ham, young d'Esparvieu remarked to the angel, "I used to think that a murder was something very extraordinary. Well, I was mistaken. It is the simplest, the most natural action in the world." "And of most ancient tradition," replied the angel. "For long centuries it was both usual and necessary for man to kill and despoil his fellows. It is still recommended in warfare. It is also honourable to attempt human life in certain definite circumstances, and people approved when you wanted to assassinate me, Maurice, because it appeared to you that I had been intimate with your mistress. But killing a police inspector is not the action of a man of fashion." "Be silent!" exclaimed Maurice. "Be silent, scoundrel! I killed the poor inspector instinctively, not knowing what I was doing. I am grieved to my heart about it. But it is not I, it is you who are the guilty one, and you who are the murderer. It was you who lured me along this path of revolt and violence, which leads to the pit. You have been my undoing. You have sacrificed my peace of mind, my happiness, to your pride and your wickedness, and all in vain. For I warn you, Arcade, you will not succeed in what you are undertaking." The concierge brought in the newspapers. On seeing them, Maurice grew pale. They announced the outrage in the Rue de Rome in huge headlines. "An inspector killed. 2 cyclist policemen and 2 bakers seriously wounded. 3 houses blown up. Numerous victims." Maurice let the paper drop, and said in a weak, plaintive voice, "Arcade, why did you not slay me in the little garden at Versailles amidst the roses, to the song of the blackbirds?" Meanwhile, terror reigned in Paris. In the public squares and in the crowded streets, housewives, string bag in hand, grew pale as they listened to the story of the crime, and consigned the perpetrators to the most dreadful punishment. Shopkeepers, standing at the doors of their shops, put it all down to the anarchists, syndicalists, socialists, and radicals, and demanded that special measures should be taken against them. The more thoughtful people recognized the handiwork of the Jew and the German, and demanded the expulsion of all aliens. Many vaunted the ways of America and advocated lynching. In addition to the printed news, sinister rumours became current. Explosions had been heard at various places. Everywhere bombs had been discovered. Everywhere individuals, taken for malefactors, had been struck down by the popular arm and given up to justice, torn to ribbons. On the Place de la République, a drunkard who was crying, "Down with the police!" was torn to pieces by the crowd. The President of the Council and Minister of Justice held long conferences with the Prefect of Police, and they agreed to take immediate action. In order to allay the excitement of the Parisians, they arrested 5 or 6 hooligans out of the 30,000 which the capital contains. The chief of the Russian police, believing he recognized in this attack the methods of the Nihilists, demanded, on behalf of his government, that a dozen refugees should be given up. The demand was immediately granted. Proceedings were also taken for certain individuals to be extradited, to ensure the safety of the King of Spain. On learning of these energetic measures, Paris breathed once more, and the evening papers congratulated the government. There was excellent news of the wounded. They were out of danger, and identified as their assailants all who were brought before them. True, Inspector Gros was dead, but 2 Sisters of Mercy kept vigil at his side, and the President of the Council came and laid the cross of honour on the breast of this victim of duty. At night there were panics. In the Avenue de la Revolt, the police, noticing a travelling acrobat's caravan on a piece of waste ground, took it for the retreat of a band of robbers. They whistled for help, and when they were a goodly number, attacked the caravan. Some worthy citizens joined them. 15,000 revolver shots were fired, the caravan was blown up with dynamite, and among the débris they found the corpse of a monkey. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of The Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 34, which contains an account of the arrest of Bouchotte and Maurice, of the disaster which befell the d'Esparvieu library, and of the departure of the angels. Maurice d'Esparvieu passed a terrible night. At the least sound he seized his revolver that he might not fall alive into the hands of justice. When morning came, he snatched the newspapers from the hands of the concierge, devoured them greedily, and gave a cry of joy. He had just read that Inspector Gros having been taken to the morgue for the post-mortem, the police surgeons had only discovered bruises and contusions of a very superficial nature, and stated that death had been brought about by the rupture of an aneurism of the aorta. "You see, Arcade," he exclaimed triumphantly, "you see, I am not an assassin. I am innocent. I could never have imagined how extremely agreeable it is to be innocent." Then he grew thoughtful, and, no unusual phenomenon, reflection dissipated his gaiety. "I am innocent, but there is no disguising the fact," he said, shaking his head. "I am one of a band of malefactors. I live with miscreants." "You are in your right place there, Arcade, for you are deceitful, cruel, and perverse. But I come of good family, and have received an excellent education, and I blush for it." "I also," said Arcade, "have received an excellent education." "Where was that?" "In heaven." "No, Arcade, no. You never had any education. If good principles had been inculcated into you, you would still hold them. Such principles are never lost. In my childhood I learnt to revere my family, my country, my religion. I have not forgotten the lesson, and I never shall. Do you know what shocks me most in you? It is not your perversity, your cruelty, your black ingratitude. It is not your agnosticism, which may be borne with at a pinch. It is not your scepticism, though it is very much out of date, for since the national awakening there is no longer any scepticism in France. No, what disgusts me in you is your lack of taste, the bad style of your ideas, the inelegance of your doctrines. You think like an intellectual, you speak like a freethinker. You have theories which reek of radicalism and Combeism and all ignoble systems. Get along with you, you disgust me. Arcade, my old friend Arcade, my dear angel Arcade, my beloved child, listen to your guardian angel. Yield to my prayers. Renounce your mad ideas. Become good, simple, innocent, and happy once more. Put on your hat, come with me to Notre Dame. We will say a prayer and burn a candle together." Meanwhile, public opinion was still active in the matter. The leading papers, the organs of the national awakening, in articles of real elevation and real depth, unravelled the philosophy of this monstrous attack which was revolting to the conscience. They discovered the real origin, the indirect but effective cause in the revolutionary doctrines which had been disseminated unchecked, in the weakening of social ties, the relaxing of moral discipline, in the repeated appeals to every appetite, to every greedy desire. It would be needful, so as to cut down the evil at its root, to repudiate as quickly as possible all such chimeras and utopias as syndicalism, the income tax, etc., etc., etc. Many newspapers, and these not the least important, pointed out that the recrudescence of crime was but the natural fruit of impiety, and concluded that the salvation of society lay in a unanimous and sincere return to religion. On the Sunday which followed the crime, the congregations in the churches were noticed to be unusually large. Judge Salneuve, who was entrusted with the task of investigation, first examined the persons arrested by the police, and lost his way among attractive but illusory clues. However, the report of the detective Montremain, which was laid before him, put him on the right road, and soon led him to recognize the miscreants of La Jonchère as the authors of the crime of the Rue de Ramey. He ordered a search to be made for Arcade and Zita, and issued a warrant against Prince Istar, on whom the detectives laid hands as he was leaving Bouchotte's, where he had been depositing some bombs of new design. The Carib, on learning the detectives' intentions, smiled broadly, and asked them if they had a powerful motor car. On their replying that they had one at the door, he assured them that was all he wanted. Thereupon he felled the two detectives on the stairs, walking up to the waiting car, flung the chauffeur under a motor bus which was opportunely passing, and seized the steering wheel under the eyes of the terrified crowd. That same evening, Monsieur Jeancourt, the police magistrate, entered Théophile's rooms just when Bouchotte was swallowing a raw egg to clear her voice, for she was to sing her new song, "They Haven't Got Any in Germany," at the National El Dorado that evening. The musician was absent. Bouchotte received the magistrate, and received him with a hauteur which intensified the simplicity of her attire. Bouchotte was en déshabille. The worthy magistrate seized the score of Aline, Queen of Golconda, and the love letters which the singer carefully preserved in the drawer of the table by her bed, for she was an orderly young woman. He was about to withdraw when he espied a cupboard, which he opened with a careless air, and found machines capable of blowing up half of Paris, and a pair of large white wings, whose nature and use appeared inexplicable to him. Bouchotte was invited to complete her toilet, and in spite of her cries was taken off to the police station. Monsieur Salneuve was indefatigable. After the examination of the papers seized in Bouchotte's house, and acting on the information of Montremain, he issued a warrant for the arrest of young d'Esparvieu, which was executed on Wednesday the 27th of May at 7 o'clock in the morning, with great discretion. For 3 days Maurice had neither slept nor eaten, loved nor lived. He had not a moment's doubt as to the nature of his matutinal visit. At the sight of the police magistrate a strange calm fell on him. Arcade had not returned to sleep in the flat. Maurice begged the magistrate to wait for him, dressed with care, and then accompanied the magistrate a calmness of mind which was barely disturbed when the door of the concierge closed on him. Alone in his cell, he climbed upon the table to look out. His tranquillity was due to his weariness of spirit, to his numbed senses, and to the fact that he no longer stood in fear of arrest. His misfortune endowed him with superior wisdom. He felt he had fallen into a state of grace. He did not think too highly or too humbly of himself, but left his cause in the hands of God. With no desire to cover up his faults, which he would not hide even from himself, he addressed himself in mind to Providence, to point out that if he had fallen into disorder and rebellion, it was to lead his erring angel back into the straight path. He stretched himself on the couch and slept in peace. On hearing of the arrest of a music-hall singer and of a young man of fashion, both Paris and the provinces felt painful surprise. Deeply stirred by the tragic accounts which the leading newspapers were bringing out, the general idea was that the sort of people the authorities ought to bring to justice were ferocious anarchists, all reeking and dripping from deeds of blood and arson. But they failed to understand what the world of art and fashion should have to do with such things. At this news, which he was one of the last to hear, the President of the Council and Keeper of the Seals started up in his chair. The sphinxes that adorned it were less terrible than he, and in the throes of his angry meditation he cut the mahogany of his imperial table with his penknife, after the manner of Napoleon. And when Judge Salneuve, whose attendance he had commanded, appeared before him, the President flung his penknife in the grate, as Louis XIV flung his cane out of the window in the presence of Lauzun, and it cost him a supreme effort to master himself and to say in a voice of suppressed fury, "Are you mad? Surely I said often enough that I meant the plot to be anarchist, anti-social, fundamentally anti-social and anti-governmental, with a shade of syndicalism. I have made it clear enough that I wanted it kept within these lines, and what do you go and make of it? The vengeance of anarchists and aspirants to freedom? Whom do you arrest? A singer adored of the nationalist public, and the son of a man highly esteemed in the Catholic party, who receives our bishops and has the entrée to the Vatican, a man who may be one day sent as ambassador to the Pope. At one blow you alienate 160 deputies and 40 senators of the right on the very eve of a motion to discuss the question of religious pacification. You embroil me with my friends of today, with my friends of tomorrow. Was it to find out if you were in the same dilemma as Des that you seized the love letters of young Maurice d'Esparvieu? I can put your mind at rest on that point. You are, and all Paris knows it. But it is not to avenge your personal affronts that you are on the bench." "Monsieur le Garde de Sceaux," murmured the judge, nearly apoplectic and in a choked voice, "I am an honest man." "You are a fool, and a provincial. Listen to me. If Maurice d'Esparvieu and Mademoiselle Bouchotte are not released within half an hour, I will crush you like a piece of glass. Be off!" Monsieur René d'Esparvieu went himself to fetch his son from the concierge, and took him back to the old house in the Rue Garancière. The return was triumphant. The news had been disseminated that Maurice had, with generous imprudence, interested himself in an attempt to restore the monarchy, and that Judge Salneuve, the infamous Freemason, the tool of Combes and André, had tried to compromise the young man by making him out to be an accomplice of a band of criminals. That was what Abbé Patouille seemed to think, and he answered for Maurice as for himself. It was known, moreover, that breaking with his father, who had rallied to the support of the Republic, young d'Esparvieu was on the high road to becoming an out-and-out Royalist. The people who had an inside knowledge of things saw in his arrest the vengeance of the Jews. Was not Maurice a notorious anti Semite? Catholic youths went forth to hurl imprecations at Judge Salneuve under the windows of his residence in the Rue Guénégaud, opposite the Mint. On the Boulevard du Palais a band of students presented Maurice with a branch of palm. Maurice made a charming reply. Maurice was overcome with emotion when he beheld the old house in which his childhood had been spent, and fell weeping into his mother's arms. It was a great day, unhappily marred by one painful incident. Monsieur Sariette, who had lost his reason as a consequence of the shocking events that had taken place in the Rue de Courcelles, had suddenly become violent. He had shut himself up in the library, and there he had remained for 24 hours, uttering the most horrible cries, and, turning a deaf ear alike to threats and entreaties, refused to come out. He had spent the night in a condition of extreme restlessness, for all night long the lamp had been seen passing rapidly to and fro behind the curtains. In the morning, hearing Hippolyte shouting to him from the court below, he opened the window of the Hall of Spheres and the Philosophers, and heaved 2 or 3 rather weighty tomes on to the old valet's head. The whole of the domestic staff, men, women, and boys, hurried to the spot, and the librarian proceeded to throw out books by the armful on to their heads. In view of the gravity of the situation, Monsieur René d'Esparvieu did not disdain to intervene. He appeared in nightcap and dressing gown, and attempted to reason with the poor lunatic, whose only reply was to pour forth torrents of abuse on the man whom, till then, he had worshipped as his benefactor, and to endeavour to crush him beneath all the Bibles, all the Talmuds, all the sacred books of India and Persia, all the Greek fathers, and all the Latin fathers, St. John Chrysostom, St. Gregory Nazianzen, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, all the apologists, aye, and under the Histoire de Variation annotated by Bossuet himself. Octavos, quartos, folios came crashing down, and lay in a sordid heap on the courtyard pavement. The letters of Gassendi, of Père Mersenne, of Pascal, were blown about hither and thither by the wind. The lady's maid, who had stooped down to rescue some of the sheets from the gutter, got a blow on the head from an enormous Dutch atlas. Madame René d'Esparvieu had been terrified by the ominous sounds, and appeared on the scene without waiting to apply the finishing touches of powder and paint. When he caught sight of her, old Sariette became more violent than ever. Down they came, one after another, as hard as he could pelt them. The busts of the poets, philosophers, and historians of antiquity, Homer, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Herodotus, Thucydides, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Cicero, Virgil, Horace, Seneca, Epictetus, all lay scattered on the ground. The celestial sphere and the terrestrial globe descended with a terrifying crash that was followed by a ghastly hush, broken only by the shrill laughter of little Léon, who was looking down on the scene from a window above. A locksmith having opened the library door, all the household hastened to enter, and found the aged Sariette entrenched behind piles of books, busily engaged in tearing and slashing away at the Lucretius of the Prior de Vendôme, annotated in Voltaire's own hand. They had to force a way through the barricade. But the maniac, perceiving that his stronghold was being invaded, fled away and escaped on to the roof. For 2 whole hours he gave vent to shouts and yells that were heard far and wide. In the Rue de Garancière the crowd kept growing bigger and bigger. All had their eyes fixed on the unhappy creature, and whenever he stumbled on the slates, which cracked beneath him, they gave a shout of terror. In the midst of the crowd the Abbé Patouille, who expected every moment to see him hurled into space, was reciting the prayers for the dying, and making ready to give him the absolution in extremis. There was a cordon of police round the house keeping order. Someone summoned the fire brigade, and the sound of their approach was soon heard. They placed a ladder against the wall of the house, and after a terrific struggle managed to secure the maniac, who in the course of his desperate resistance had one of the muscles of his arm torn out. He was immediately removed to an asylum. Maurice dined at home, and there were smiles of tenderness and affection when Victor, the old butler, brought on the roast veal. Monsieur l'Abbé Patouille sat at the right hand of the Christian mother, unctuously contemplating the family which Heaven had so plentifully blessed. Nevertheless, Madame d'Esparvieu was ill at ease. Every day she received anonymous letters of so insulting and coarse a nature that she thought at first they must come from a discharged footman. She now knew they were the handiwork of her youngest daughter, Berthe, a mere child. Little Léon, too, gave her pain and anxiety. He paid no attention to his lessons, and was given to bad habits. He showed a cruel disposition. He had plucked his sister's canaries alive. He stuck innumerable pins into the chair on which Mademoiselle Caporal was accustomed to sit, and had stolen 14 francs from the poor girl, who did nothing but cry and dab her eyes and nose from morning till night. No sooner was dinner over than Maurice rushed off to the little dwelling in the Rue de Rome, impatient to meet his angel again. Through the door he heard a loud sound of voices, and saw assembled in the room where the apparition had taken place Arcade, Zita, the angelic musician, and Caroube, who was lying on the bed, smoking a huge pipe, carelessly scorching pillows, sheets, and coverlets. They embraced Maurice, and announced their departure. Their faces shone with happiness and courage. Alone the inspired author of Aline, Queen of Golconda, shed tears and raised his terrified gaze to heaven. The Caroube forced him into the party of rebellion by setting before him 2 alternatives: either to allow himself to be dragged from prison to prison on earth, or to carry fire and sword into the palace of Ialdabaoth. Maurice perceived with sorrow that the earth had scarcely any hold over them. They were setting out filled with immense hope, which was quite justifiable. Doubtless they were but a few combatants to oppose the innumerable soldiers of the Sultan of the Heavens, but they counted on compensating for the inferiority of their numbers by the irresistible impetus of a sudden attack. They were not ignorant of the fact that Ialdabaoth, who flatters himself on knowing all things, sometimes allows himself to be taken by surprise, and it certainly looked as if the first attack would have taken him unawares had it not been for the warning of the Archangel Michael. The celestial army had made no progress since its victory over the rebels before the beginning of time. As regards armaments and material, it was as out of date as the army of the Moors. Its generals slumbered in sloth and ignorance. Loaded with honours and riches, they preferred the delights of the banquet to the fatigues of war. Michael, the commander-in-chief, ever loyal and brave, had lost, with the passing of centuries, his fire and enthusiasm. The conspirators of 1914, on the other hand, knew the very latest and the most delicate appliances of science for the art of destruction. At length all was ready and decided upon. The army of Revolt, assembled by corps each 100,000 angels strong, on all the waste places of the earth, steppes, pampas, deserts, fields of ice and snow, was ready to launch itself against the sky. The angels, in modifying the rhythm of the atoms of which they are composed, are able to traverse the most varied mediums. Spirits that have descended onto the earth, being formed, since their incarnation, of too compact a substance, can no longer fly of themselves, and to rise into ethereal regions, and then insensibly grow volatilized, have need of the assistance of their brothers, who, though revolutionaries like themselves, nevertheless stayed behind in the Empyrean, and remained, not immaterial, for all is matter in the universe, but gloriously untrammeled and diaphanous. Certes, it was not without painful anxiety that Arcady, Istar, and Zeta prepared themselves to pass from the heavy atmosphere of the earth to the limpid depths of the heavens. To plunge into the ether there is need to expand such energy that the most intrepid hesitate to take flight. Their very substance, while penetrating this fine medium, must in itself grow fine spun, become vaporized, and pass from human dimensions to the volume of the vastest clouds which have ever enveloped the earth. Soon they would surpass in grandeur the uttermost planets, whose orbits they, invisible and imponderable, would traverse without disturbing. In this enterprise, the vastest that angels could undertake, their substance would be ultimately hotter than the fire and colder than the ice, and they would suffer pangs sharper than death. Maurice read all the daring and the pain of the undertaking in the eyes of Arcady. "You are going?" he said to him, weeping. "We are going, with Nectaire, to seek the great archangel to lead us to victory." "Whom do you call thus?" "The priests of the Demiurge have made him known to you in their calumnies." "Unhappy being," sighed Maurice. Arcady embraced him, and Maurice felt the angel's tears as they dropped upon his cheek. Chapter 34. Chapter 35 of the Revolt of the Angels. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 35. And last, wherein the sublime dream of Satan is unfolded. Climbing the 7 steep terraces which rise up from the bed of the Ganges to the temples muffled in creepers, the 5 angels reached, by half-obliterated paths, the wild garden filled with perfumed clusters of grapes and chattering monkeys, and at the far end thereof they discovered him whom they had come to seek. The archangel lay with his elbow on black cushions embroidered with golden flames. At his feet crouched lions and gazelles. Twined in the trees, tame serpents turned on him their friendly gaze. At the sight of his angelic visitors, his face grew melancholy. Long since, in the days when, with his brow crowned with grapes, and his sceptre of vine leaves in his hand, he had taught and comforted mankind, his heart had many times been heavy with sorrow. But never yet, since his glorious downfall, had his beautiful face expressed such pain and anguish. Zita told him of the black standards assembled in crowds in all the waste places of the globe, of the deliverance premeditated and prepared in the provinces of heaven, where the first revolt had long ago been fomented. "Prince," she went on, "your army awaits you. Come, lead it on to victory." "Friends," replied the great archangel, "I was aware of the object of your visit. Baskets of fruit and honeycombs await you under the shade of this mighty tree. The sun is about to descend into the roseate waters of the sacred river. When you have eaten, you will slumber pleasantly in this garden, where the joys of the intellect and of the senses have reigned since the day when I drove hence the spirit of the old demiurge. To-morrow I will give you my answer." Night hung its blue over the garden. Satan fell asleep. He had a dream, and in that dream, soaring over the earth, he saw it covered with angels in revolt, beautiful as gods, whose eyes darted lightning. And from pole to pole one single cry, formed of a myriad cries, mounted towards him, filled with hope and love. And Satan said, "Let us go forth. Let us seek the ancient adversary in his high abode." And he led the countless host of angels over the celestial plains. And Satan was cognizant of what took place in the heavenly citadel. When news of this second revolt came thither, the Father said to the Son, "The irreconcilable foe is rising once again. Let us take heed to ourselves, and in this, our time of danger, look to our defences, lest we lose our high abode." And the Son, consubstantial with the Father, replied, "We shall triumph under the sign that gave Constantine the victory." Indignation burst forth on the mountain of God. At first the faithful seraphim condemned the rebels to terrible torture, but afterwards decided on doing battle with them. The anger burning in the hearts of all inflamed each countenance. They did not doubt of victory, but treachery was feared, and eternal darkness had been at once decreed for spies and alarmists. There was shouting and singing of ancient hymns and praise of the Almighty. They drank of the mystic wine. Courage, overinflated, came near to giving way, and a secret anxiety stole into the inner depths of their souls. The Archangel Michael took supreme command. He reassured their minds by his serenity. His countenance, wherein his soul was visible, expressed contempt for danger. By his orders the chiefs of the thunderbolts, the cherubs, grown dull with a long interval of peace, paced with heavy steps the ramparts of the holy mountain, and, letting the gaze of their bovine eyes wander over the glittering clouds of their Lord, strove to place the divine batteries in position. After inspecting the defences, they swore to the Most High that all was in readiness. They took counsel together as to the plan they should follow. Michael was for the offensive. He, as a consummate soldier, said it was the supreme law. Attack or be attacked. There was no middle course. "Moreover," he added, "the offensive attitude is particularly suitable to the ardour of the thrones and dominations." Beyond that, it was impossible to obtain a word from the valiant chief, and this silence seemed the mark of a genius sure of himself. As soon as the approach of the enemy was announced, Michael sent forth 3 armies to meet them, commanded by the archangels Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel. Standards, displaying all the colours of the Orient, were unfurled above the ethereal plains, and the thunders rolled over the starry floors. For 3 days and 3 nights was the lot of the terrible and adorable armies unknown on the mountain of God. Towards dawn on the 4th day news came, but it was vague and confused. There were rumours of indecisive victories, of the triumph now of this side, now of that. There came reports of glorious deeds which were dissipated in a few hours. The thunderbolts of Raphael, hurled against the rebels, had, it was said, consumed entire squadrons. The troops commanded by the impure Zeta were thought to have been swallowed up in the whirlwind of a tempest of fire. It was believed that the savage Istar had been flung headlong into the gulf of perdition so suddenly that the blasphemies begun in his mouth had been forced backwards with explosive results. It was popularly supposed that Satan, laden with chains of adamant, had been plunged once again into the abyss. Meanwhile, the commanders of the three armies had sent no messages. Mutterings and murmurs, mingled with the rumors of glory, gave rise to fears of an indecisive battle, a precipitate retreat. Insolent voices gave out that a spirit of the lowest category, a guardian angel, the insignificant Arcadi, had checked and routed the dazzling host of the three great archangels. There were also rumors of a wholesale defection in the seventh heaven, where rebellion had broken out before the beginning of time, and some had even seen black clouds of impious angels joining the armies of the rebels on earth. But no one lent an ear to the odious rumors, and stress was laid on the news of victory, which ran from lip to lip, each statement readily finding confirmation. The high places resounded with hymns of joy. The seraphim celebrated on harp and psaltery Sabaoth, God of thunder. The voices of the elect united with those of the angels in glorifying the invisible, and at the thought of the bloodshed that the ministers of holy wrath had caused among the rebels, sighs of relief and jubilation were wafted from the heavenly Jerusalem towards the Most High. But the beatitude of the Most Blessed, having swelled to the utmost limit before due time, could increase no more, and the very excess of their felicity completely dulled their senses. The songs had not yet ceased when the guards watching on the ramparts signalled the approach of the first fugitives of the divine army. Seraphim on tattered wing, flying in disorder, maimed cherubs going on 3 feet. With impassive gaze, Michael, prince of warriors, measured the extent of the disaster, and his keen intelligence penetrated its causes. The armies of the living God had taken the offensive, but by one of those fatalities in war which disconcert the plans of the greatest captains, the enemy had also taken the offensive, and the effect was evident. Scarcely were the gates of the citadel opened to receive the glorious but shattered remnants of the three armies, when a rain of fire fell on the mountain of God. Satan's army was not yet in sight, but the walls of topaz, the cupolas of emerald, the roofs of diamond, all fell in with an appalling crash under the discharge of the electrophores. The ancient thunderclouds essayed to reply, but the bolts fell short, and their thunders were lost in the deserted plains of the skies. Smitten by an invisible foe, the faithful angels abandoned the ramparts. Michael went to announce to his God that the holy mountain would fall into the hands of the demon in 24 hours, and that nothing remained for the Master of the heavens but to seek safety in flight. The seraphim placed the jewels of the celestial crown in coffers. Michael offered his arm to the Queen of Heaven, and the Holy Family escaped from the palace by a subterranean passage of porphyry. A deluge of fire was falling on the citadel. Regaining his post once more, the glorious archangel declared that he would never capitulate, and straightway advanced the standards of the living God. That same evening the rebel host made its entry into the thrice sacred city. On a fiery steed, Satan led his demons. Behind him marched Arcadi, Istar, and Zeta. As in the ancient revels of Dionysus, old Nectar bestrode his ass. Thereafter, floating out far behind, followed the black standards. The garrison laid down their arms before Satan. Michael placed his flaming sword at the feet of the conquering archangel. "Take back your sword, Michael," said Satan. "It is Lucifer who yields it to you. Bear it in defence of peace and law." Then, letting his gaze fall on the leaders of the celestial cohorts, he cried in a ringing voice, "Archangel Michael, and you, powers, thrones, and dominations, swear all of you to be faithful to your God." "We swear it," they replied with one voice. And Satan said, "Powers, thrones, and dominations of all past wars, I wish but to remember the invincible courage that you displayed, and the loyalty which you rendered to authority, for these assure me of the steadfastness of the fealty you have just sworn to me." The following day, on the ethereal plain, Satan commanded the black standards to be distributed to the troops, and the winged soldiers covered them with kisses and bedewed them with tears. And Satan had himself crowned God. Thronging round the glittering walls of heavenly Jerusalem, apostles, pontiffs, virgins, martyrs, confessors, the whole company of the elect, who during the fierce battle had enjoyed delightful tranquillity, tasted infinite joy in the spectacle of the coronation. The elect saw with ravishment the Most High precipitated into hell, and Satan seated on the throne of the Lord. In conformity with the will of God, which had cut them off from sorrow, they sang in the ancient fashion the praises of their new master. And Satan, piercing space with his keen glance, contemplated the little globe of earth and water where of old he had planted the vine and formed the first tragic chorus. And he fixed his gaze on that Rome where the fallen god had founded his empire on fraud and lie. Nevertheless, at that moment a saint ruled over the church. Satan saw him praying and weeping, and he said to him, "To thee I entrust my spouse. Watch over her faithfully. In thee I confirm the right and power to decide matters of doctrine, to regulate the use of the sacraments, to make laws and to uphold purity of morals. And the faithful shall be under obligation to conform thereto. My church is eternal, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Thou art infallible. Nothing is changed." And the successor of the apostles felt flooded with rapture. He prostrated himself, and with his forehead touching the floor, replied, "O Lord my God, I recognize thy voice. Thy breath has been wafted like balm to my heart. Blessed be thy name. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." And Satan found pleasure in praise and in the exercise of his grace. He loved to hear his wisdom and his power be lauded. He listened with joy to the canticles of the cherubim, who celebrated his good deeds, and he took no pleasure in listening to Nectaire's flute, because it celebrated nature's self, yielded to the insect and to the blade of grass their share of power and love, and counselled happiness and freedom. Satan, whose flesh had crept, in days gone by, at the idea that suffering prevailed in the world, now felt himself inaccessible to pity. He regarded suffering and death as the happy results of omnipotence and sovereign kindness, and the savour of the blood of victims rose upward toward him like sweet incense. He fell to condemning intelligence and to hating curiosity. He himself refused to learn anything more, for fear that in acquiring fresh knowledge he might let it be seen that he had not known everything at the very outset. He took pleasure in mystery, and believing that he would seem less great by being understood, he affected to be unintelligible. Dense fumes of theology filled his brain. One day, following the example of his predecessor, he conceived the notion of proclaiming himself one God in 3 persons. Seeing Arcade smile as this proclamation was made, he drove him from his presence. Istar and Zita had long since returned to earth. Thus centuries passed like seconds. Now, one day, from the altitude of his throne, he plunged his gaze into the depths of the pit, and saw Yaldabaoth in the Gehenna, where he himself had long lain enchained. Amid the everlasting gloom Ialdabaoth still retained his lofty mien. Blackened and shattered, terrible and sublime, he glanced upwards at the palace of the King of Heaven with a look of proud disdain, then turned away his head. And the new God, as he looked upon his foe, beheld the light of intelligence and love pass across his sorrow-stricken countenance. And lo! Ialdabaoth is now contemplating the earth, and, seeing it sunk in wickedness and suffering, he began to foster thoughts of kindliness in his heart. On a sudden he rose up, and beating the ether with his mighty arms, as though with oars, he hastened thither to instruct and to console mankind. Already his vast shadow shed upon the unhappy planet a shade soft as a night of love. And Satan awoke bathed in an icy sweat. Nectaire, Istar, Arcady, and Zita were standing round him. The finches were singing. "Comrades," said the great archangel, "no, we will not conquer the heavens. Enough to have the power. War engenders war, and victory defeat. God, conquered, will become Satan. Satan, conquering, will become God. May the fates spare me this terrible lot. I love the hell which formed my genius. I love the earth where I have done some good, if it be possible to do any good in this fearful world, where beings live but by rapine. Now, thanks to us, the God of old is dispossessed of his terrestrial empire, and every thinking being on this globe disdains him or knows him not. But what matter that men should be no longer submissive to Ialdabaoth, if the spirit of Ialdabaoth is still in them? If they, like him, are jealous, violent, quarrelsome, and greedy, and the foes of the arts and of beauty? What matter that they have rejected the ferocious demiurge, if they do not hearken to the friendly demons who teach all truths, to Dionysus, Apollo, and the Muses? As to ourselves, celestial spirits, sublime demons, we have destroyed Ialdabaoth, our tyrant, if in ourselves we have destroyed ignorance and fear." And Satan, turning to the gardener, said, "Nectaire, you fought with me before the birth of the world. We were conquered because we failed to understand that victory is a spirit, and that it is in ourselves and in ourselves alone that we must attack and destroy Ialdabaoth." The End. End of chapter 35. End of The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. This recording has been by Roger Melin.